This is my first attempt at a video lesson, as it were. I just wanted to I hope you're all well and safe. I'm just basically going to show you some examples of what I've been working on myself at the moment. It's very similar to the projects that I've set with you and the work that you've been doing before we had lockdown. So basically, first of all, I've just been looking at doing some observational studies in and around the house, in the garden, and some of the walks to keep the exercise going. Doing little studies, little drawings, and I'll show you now some of those. So we've got a little drawing here, a little sketch of sofas, the goldfish bowl. Can't see the fish. Okay. I've been doing some sketches outside of the apple tree. We've got a really lovely apple tree here. It's very old and ornate looking. It's kind of almost looks a little bit like sort of bones and legs and arms. So I've been looking at the structure of that and doing some little sort of continuous line drawings. So not taking the pencil off at all to get the kind of curvature and the movement. And I was looking at sort of mark making with some cross hatching techniques and a little bit of stippling here to pick up some of the moss on the actual tree as well, and then some views through the window of the hedge, and obviously the shadows cast and the table by the window, so using a little bit of cross hatching here to get a little bit of solidity. Alongside that, I've been doing a few little sketches of outside and the house, a fish, a few sketches of the garden as well, so a little bit of watercolour pencil. When I've been going on walks, there's some really lovely walls here in Wales, and so I've been picking up some of the shapes of the walls, the dry stone walling, and just picking up those kind of sort of very quick sketches as I'm doing my sort of hour walk with my kids, and picking up some of the shapes and the diagonals of some of those particular forms and shapes as well. So trying to use different materials. I haven't got a lot of materials, so it's a little bit of watercolour, pencil, fine liner, and some 4B pencils. So I'm just sticking to some of those things to start off with, just to record. So from that, pretty much these have been my inspiration for the next sort of process, some initial ideas that I've had. So basically starting from using the stones in particular, I've started to look at movement and space. I managed to find, I've got some watercolour pencils, so I've been starting to play around with warm and cold colours, not looking so much at the colours in the stones themselves, the natural colours, but just being a little bit more inventive and thinking about warm and cold colours and bringing, warm colours obviously advance towards you, cold colours go further away, looking at mark making techniques of bringing some of those cross hatchings in and some of the patterns that were on the stones and the marks that were on the stones. So these two in particular, have been looking at sort of movement and space, okay, and creating more space by having less stones in there. Then I've started to think about, in terms of an idea, is elongating and stretching out the picture plane a little bit, so it's not so wide, it's a little bit narrower. So playing around with the picture plane and the amount of space that I've got to play with, and then looking at the way some of the objects bounce with each other and kind of work against each other, as well as the warm and the cold again, so maybe it being less red and more pink, and it's just really just playing around. This is a great way of exploring ideas and then thinking about reviewing them afterwards and thinking about what you're doing or could do with them afterwards, but partly it's kind of an intuitive thing as well. Okay, so that's those. I then found a little bit of paint, and I painted it onto a piece of brown paper that I found. Okay, so I've got that sort of torn element on the paintwork, ripped it off, painted on it, put some paper over the top, ripped it away. So I'm starting to look at those kind of building up layers and textures a little bit. Where are we now? Then I started to play around with getting some cutting up shapes from, cereal boxes, cardboard boxes, anything that's been delivered, thinking about those patterns so it becomes almost like a little three-dimensional thing. Obviously, I don't have a lot of paints at the moment, so like you, I'm using what's around, what's in the shed, what I've got, and starting to play around with particular shapes and how they're arranged. Didn't quite like that very much, so I've moved on to this. I've started to use a little bit more kind of orange and blues, and I've made some of the stone shapes a little bit more geometric, more sort of harsher angles. Okay, so it's a bit more sort of square as such. So I've got 4 initial ideas there, just purely through looking at shape, form, space, mark making techniques. And then what I've decided to do, and what you really need to be doing once you've done those initial ideas, is start to think about compositional arrangements, okay, and planning a composition. So I'm still thinking, I'm still trying out different ideas. I'm still thinking about those shapes from the wall itself, but I'm thinking about, I've turned this picture plane on its side, so it's not a landscape now. It hasn't started as a primary source from a landscape. I'm continuing with that landscape shape. It's now become a portrait shape. I've flipped it on its side, so I want to try out. I'm still thinking about what I can do with that image. Even though they're shapes and forms, I'm still thinking about, the types of mark making techniques that I'm using. So I'm using biro or fine liner. My marks here are much more energetic. There's much more movement. Okay. There's much more energy within the ideas as well. So as those little thumbnails are progressing, I'm starting to add a little bit more colour. I'm starting to maybe add a little bit more shape. I'm starting to make some of those shapes a little bit wider. My marks might be a bit more frantic, okay? So, there might be sweeping marks like that, or there might be marks where I'm using my biro and I'm really kind of controlling that cross-hatching in the corner, okay, to build up more solidity, more form against the sort of spaces that are involved, okay? So this is what I want you to be sort of focusing on at the moment, looking at how you can, from those initial studies, those primary sources, you've got those initial ideas. How can you then develop that? Okay, how can you then move it on? So I'm directly then selecting these, okay, as an initial idea. Then I'm starting to develop that as a plan. So it becomes almost like a little sequence, okay? Now, you don't have to make it abstract. It can be realistic. It can be figurative. You can make it look like it's a mountainside or a wall. It's totally up to you, okay? But obviously, as you're going along, you must think about how and review and reflect on what you're doing. Obviously, I haven't got many annotations here, but it's very important that you do that, okay? To review what you're doing. So I will look at these and I will think which one is going to be the one I'm going to select maybe to develop, which one is working, which isn't working, okay? So I'm analysing the visual language, okay? Hopefully that wasn't too boring for you and you really enjoyed that. Till next time, goodbye.